Thank you, Karen. That was incredible. Um, Again, you're such a gift to our community. Our next ancient witness reading comes from Matthew chapter 13, verses 1 through 9, and then 18 through 23. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there, while the crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen. Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. This is what was sown on the path. As for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy, yet such a person has no root, but endures only for a while. And when trouble or persecution arises on account of the word, that person immediately falls away. And for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for the one that was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. Blessed be. So, as many of y'all know by now, I grew up steeped in the Southern Baptist tradition. I have a lot of memories of Sunday school and vacation Bible school and church camp, but not too many sermons stuck in my head, even after I started paying attention to them. There's one that really shook me, though. I was probably 8 or 9 years old when I heard it, and I can't actually remember who preached it. I think it was one of my grandmother's churches, so maybe one of their preachers. It may have been a guest pastor at my home church. I just remember him preaching on the parable of the sower, which we just heard, and saying very sternly, "Don't assume you're the good soil." And that was the first time I ever thought I might not be good. So that one really sat with me for a long time. And he meant it in a very fire and brimstone way. And I want to assure you right now, that is not where I'm headed. In the decades since I heard those words, I've learned a lot about parables and also a little bit about soil and gardening. And that's what I want to explore today. Although I have to agree with that preacher on one thing. We can't assume that we're the good soil in this story. The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, which we see a few times in the readings today, is one of my all-time favorite books. Even though right now it's story of a dystopian 2024 where environmental crisis and economic collapse lead to the election of a business-minded president who promises to dismantle government programs, privatize everything. And this is in the book, I promise, which was published in 1993, Make America Great Again. It's a little too close to home the last few years. At the heart of that book is a young woman with a condition that makes her hyper empathetic. So she's able to literally feel other people's pains and also their pleasures. And her empathy gives her insights into the nature of the divine that help some folks around her find hope and the strength to try to build something new and better. If you haven't read it, you really should. In contrast, the part of the Bible that is commonly known as the parable of the sower has been in the past one of my least favorite parables. Now, setting aside that preacher from my childhood who let me know I might be the wrong kind of dirt, the real bummer about the parable of the sower for me is that it's one of the only parables that Jesus seems to explain. There's a Jewish New Testament scholar named Amy Jill Levine. Many of you have read some of her books, and she has a great one on the parables of Jesus, which is called Short Stories by Jesus. And she talks about the Jewishness of parables in general and also Jesus' parables specifically. And this isn't one of the ones that she covers, but in the introduction, she says, Jesus told parables because they serve as keys that can unlock the mysteries we face by helping us ask the right questions. How to live in community, how to determine what ultimately matters, how to live the life that God wants us to live. They are Jesus' way of teaching, and they are remembered to this day not simply because they are in the Christian canon, but because they continue to provoke, challenge, and inspire. Now, let's be honest. The explanation of this parable that we get in Matthew doesn't really do any of those things. The beauty of a parable is that you're supposed to be able to imagine yourself or the divine into any of the roles. Maybe I'm the good soil, maybe I'm the seed, maybe I'm the birds that eat the seed, or the rocks, or the sower. Maybe the Holy One is any one of those things. Or we are both all at once. So many options. But then Matthew's like, no, Jesus said the seeds are the word and the sower is God, and we're the soil, and we better be the right soil, or woe unto us. We call this the parable of the sower, but I'm supposed to just accept that it's really a story about soil and somehow decide to be good soil, although it's not really up to the dirt whether it has rocks or is shallow or is deep and nutritious. Well, the first good news is that the interpretation presented there in Matthew probably didn't come from Jesus. This gospel was probably written toward the end of the 1st century, and the parable interpretation probably came from a Christian community around that time. This would have been a community of missionaries, so their experience, their context, their needs would have been very different from ours. Whether we identify as Christian or not, we live in a society where Christianity is the dominant religion. So trying to connect with a story through the lens of a persecuted minority religion has limited use for most of us. So what kind of story do we need right now? One of the other ancient witness readings for today is a very famous passage from Ecclesiastes, which tells us, for everything there is a season. It's one I saw pop up a lot after the murder of George Floyd, when righteous anger brought folks into the streets again, demanding real change this time. The Speaker of the House used it, but she wasn't the only one, and this isn't a commentary on her. But I noticed that when folks quoted it, they seemed focused on a time to heal or a time to build up. It would sound very different if I got up here and preached on a time to kill, a time to hate, a time for war, right? We're not that kind of church. But if you look at that passage, I want to call your attention to something. It's not just that the author of Ecclesiastes includes the full range of human experience here, the good, the bad, and the ugly, but look at how they are presented. You might expect to see the good on one side and the bad on the other, but that's not what's there. On one side, there's a time to be born, to plant, to kill, to break down, to weep, to mourn, to throw away stones, to embrace, to seek, to keep, to tear, to keep silence, to love, and a time for war. On the other side, a time to die, a time to pluck up what is planted, to heal, build up, laugh, dance, gather stones together, refrain from embracing the time that we're currently in, a time to lose, a time to throw away, a time to sow, a time to speak, to hate, and a time for peace. What I think we can take away from all that is that we need it all. We can't choose just the times that are most appealing, and we probably can't decide what time it is. But I still think we have choices. If it's a time to break down, let's break down our systems of oppression. If it's a time to kill, let's kill any part of ourselves that might choose the economy over the lives of our most vulnerable neighbors. If it's a time to love, let's love justice, act kindly, and walk humbly, as both Micah and our own church covenant call us to do. And if it's a time to plant, which I think it is, let's plant with great intention, which means preparing the soil. Our third ancient witness is not so ancient. It's from the Michigan State University Ag Extension. And I have a very important disclaimer. I am not trying to make any statement on Michigan State University compared to any other Midwest university here. I've lived in the Midwest for just over 6 years, and I still haven't learned all the ins and outs of the college rivalries, so please forgive me if I've chosen one that's anathema to you. I think any university ag extension would give more or less the same advice on preparing a fallow or neglected field. I just like that this one was a list of questions because it kind of ties in with our parable. What do you want to use the land for? What has it been used for in the past? Do you have a mentor? Do you have all the tools you need? What's your timeline? Do you need to get this done right away, or do you have some time to nurture it? I love these questions because if we go back to the idea of thinking of ourselves as soil, where seeds may or may not take root and grow, our friends at MSU remind us that there's really no such thing as good soil and bad soil. In the parable, the sower tosses seeds in soil that's good for brambles, but not for the grains that they're trying to sow. Some of the seeds end up in the right soil for them to flourish, but in reality, that kind of soil doesn't just happen. I'm more of a houseplant person than a gardener, but my wife has the most beautiful rose bushes growing in our garden right now. She feeds them their special rose food and keeps them watered and makes sure they have the right amount of sun, and they are covered in gorgeous blooms. It's work, but she wants beautiful flowers, so she does it. One of our neighbors also has a couple of rose bushes, but I've barely seen them bloom ever. I didn't even realize they were roses for the first year or so that we were here. They're planted in a spot with too much shade, too many other plants, too small of a space, they're cramped, and I've never really seen them be fertilized or watered unless my wife does it kind of on the down low. It's not the rose bush's fault. And it's not the soil's fault. Someone chose to plant something there that wasn't a good match and then didn't do the work to nurture it. And even with as much work as my wife put into her roses this year, if she wants them to keep flourishing next year, she'll have to keep doing this over and over. Anything we try to plant right now is going to need at least that much work if it's going to flourish. Reverend Michael sent out a wonderful pastoral letter a few weeks ago with some great immediate action we could take, such as supporting our local Black-owned businesses and showing up in local government to support policies for liberation. He also talked about capacity building, like the book discussion that Sydney Reed and I have been leading on how to be an anti-racist, where as a group, we are learning together so that we can act wisely. It's important for us to remember that it's not one or the other, action or capacity building, planting or harvesting, building up or breaking down. It's both and, all of the above. We plant and we nurture. We weed ourselves of old ideas and habits to make room for the new ones to thrive, but we have to keep weeding and watering and feeding the things that we want to grow. We're the good soil and the rocky soil, and the sower and the sun, and the birds and the path, and the story only works with all of it. Amen, and blessed be.